introduction part. And if you go to the first slide. So the purpose of Paul's letter, right? He's trying to get to Spain. So I put this map up here. I don't know if you're seeing catch me, but if you see Italy right there in the top left corner, Spain is past that. For those of you who may not have went to 7th grade geography. So you see Corinth too, like right in the middle. That's his base of operations for where he's at. So he's trying to go to Rome to hunker down as his base of operations, right? So that he can get to Spain and proclaim the gospel there. Okay? But how does he do this? Right? How is he trying to get in good with the Romans or whatever? Right? How is he supposed to get them to where they'll let him come if they've never met him before? Right? And so the letter to the Romans is all about one thing. The gospel. Okay, we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago, but the gospel is not only for unbelievers, it's for believers too. Right? That I have to hear it every day. Okay, the gospel isn't ABC, you're saved, and just stay there. Right? The gospel is interactive in every single part of our lives for as long as we live. For unbelievers and believers at the same time. So, Paul, so that he can get to Spain, sends this letter to the Romans to show his gospel to these people. And then when they see what he's got, kind of how he thinks and what he thinks about the gospel of Jesus, they'll be able to receive him, and they'll have authority in that church, and they would send him out to Spain and support him. So that's his purpose. He's trying to get to Spain. And he's got to this point where, it's kind of been in the backdrop kind of throughout the rest of the chapters, and it's been building up a little bit. It's how can the law be both good and an instrument of sin? All right, it's a good question, because it's been coming up throughout, what's been going on. It's kind of been in the backdrop. It's getting a little bit, it's starting to show up a little more, get a little bit closer to our faces, and finally in chapter 7, it comes to the head. So he's got to answer the question. Right? And so, kind of part of this, you can go to the next slide, the parallels for Paul needs to explain. I love that picture. Paul needs to explain himself. Right? So, you can see the parallels in chapter 6 and chapter 7. Right? Sin reigns in 6:14, and the law reigns in 7:1. Okay? Death to sin in 6:2. Death to the law in 7:4. Freedom from sin, 6, 7, 18, and 22. And freedom from the law in 7:6. Right? So he's been making these comparisons, and so he's finally at the point where he needs to explain himself. What are you talking about, Paul? What are you talking about? And so right before we jump in, there's a little bit of kind of homework we have to get through, I think, to really be able to understand what's going on. If you go to the next slide now. So the law and I. What does he mean when he says the law? Okay, the law is the Mosaic law, the Torah. It's what was given to the Jews, the Israelites at Sinai. Okay? The law. The I. There's 4 different views on the I. Okay? So as we read, what should we say then? Is the law sin? Absolutely not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin. But who's the I? This is one of the hardest passages in the entire Bible to interpret. So there's a few different views on it. Right? The 4 views are Paul is autobiographically talking about himself after he becomes a Christian. Okay? Number 2, Paul is autobiographically talking about himself before he was converted to Christianity. Okay, number 3 is this is Adam. Right? He's already used Adam earlier, in chapter 5. So this is just Adam again. Okay? Number 4 is this is Israel under the law of Moses at Sinai. Okay? There's 4 different views. And I particularly happen to take a multi-layered view. I think that it's all 3 except for the top one. I do not think that Paul is autobiographically talking about himself as a Christian. Okay? This isn't quite as important for 7 through 12, but it's going to be a big deal when we get to 13 through 25. Because then there's a really big theological question. right? If this is Paul talking about himself as a Christian in chapter 7, he's like, well, I do what I do not want to do, but I know the law, but I can't do it. But he says in chapter 8 that he's been set free from the law of sin and death. So you can't be doing both things at both times, right? You're either doing this thing in chapter 7, or you're doing this thing in chapter 8. You can't be doing both at the same time. So this is not quite as important for this part, but it gets really important for the next part. So I want to go ahead and give it tonight. That way next week when we come back, it'll be fresh in our minds, and I'll remind us on it again. But I think that Paul is autobiographically talking about himself before he was a Christian, right? And he's speaking as a Jew, okay, in a representative way. It's kind of like if I said, well, I was under so much pressure when we first came to this country, right? As if I'm identifying myself with my ancestors. Okay, that's how Paul would have talked. That's how Jews would have viewed themselves. Okay, so that's part of it. And then he's also writing kind of he uses Adam, and we'll see it in just a second, but he uses Adam and he uses the people of Israel. You can see it in a minute. But the way that the law came to them, and then the sin multiplied. Okay, so it's the three bottom ones. And that's what we're gonna kind of be looking at as we go. So, and again, I said this is one of the hardest passages to interpret. It's one of the hardest passages, not just in Romans, but in the entire Bible. So before we jump into it, I think it's only appropriate for this passage and for others to pray for the Spirit to really just be speaking to us and illuminating the text. That way it wouldn't just be me and my opinion. It would be the Spirit showing all of us what the text is saying. So, bow your heads, please. Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that, again, just for an opportunity to preach your word. I pray, Lord, that it would be your words, not my words. That you would use my personality and my goofiness and all of it to just explain what's going on. That it would be clear to us, and that it wouldn't just be something that goes to our heads for more information, but that it would be life-changing. I pray these things, Lord, in your name. Amen. Alright, so Jim read 7 to 12 for us. But I'm going to start off from verses 7 through 8. So you can go to the next slide. I also thought that was funny, but maybe it's just me. What should we say then? Is the law sin? Absolutely not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin if it were not for the law. For example, I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, do not covet. And sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me coveting of every kind. For apart from the law, sin is dead. So the first point is that I would not have known sin apart from the law. Alright? Is the law sin? This question's been stirring up since chapter 2. Right? Is the law sin? He's been comparing it, paralleling it throughout the entire, up until this point. So the obvious question that comes next is, well, Paul, is the law sin? And Paul emphatically responds, absolutely not. In fact, the law is not sin, but instead exposes sin for what it truly is. On the contrary, I would not have known sin if it were not for the law. The word known is important. Okay? It's the difference in knowing about Michael Jordan and knowing him on a personal level. Right? So I can say, hey man, I watched Michael Jordan, or I watched LeBron James, or pick your favorite sports person, or anything else, famous person that you know. You can say, oh yeah, I know Michael Jordan, but I really have never met him. I don't know what his personality is. I haven't spent time with him. Right? Now, I don't really know him. And Paul, speaking in all the levels, the multi-layered level that he is, shows us that I did not know sin, or I would not have known sin if it were not from the law. Okay, the people of Israel, Adam, Paul himself, before he became a Christian, and everyone without the Spirit, intimately and experientially know what sin is. We know what sin is. Without the Spirit, we are fools and enemies of God who walk according to the ways of this world. We gladly do whatever we want to do because it feels good, and it's totally against God, and we enjoy it. We know what sin is, intimately and experientially. Without the Spirit, no one would really be living for God at all. And then he goes on and he uses the command to covet as an example to push things along. He's showing, it's like if I said, man, I really love this kind of peanut butter, but I think this peanut butter is better. I love Jif. So it's like this peanut butter compared to the other peanut butters. He's using this to make a point, like an illustration. All right, so he's using this as an example. Then we get into verse 8. And sin seizes an opportunity, right? Sin uses the law to produce in Israel, Adam, and us sin of every kind. If you tell me not to eat warm chocolate chip cookies after they come out of the oven, guess what I'm going to do? I think I may have used this a couple weeks ago, but it still works. I'm just going to want to do it more, right? Come on. If it's warm chocolate chip cookies, you can't tell me that you wouldn't want to do it too, right? I would do it anyway. If the speed limit sign, I'm gonna get some people with this. If the speed limit sign says 65, then guess what? I know for sure that nearly everyone in here, if not, maybe it's just me, but we'll be testing the limit to see how fast we can go before the cop pulls us over. Right? Right? The law sets a standard for us, sets a standard, and we more than jump over that standard. The line is there, and we dance all over it. And our sinfulness and our broken human nature absolutely loves to turn against that standard at every opportunity. And then it moves on, right? And he says, for apart from the law, sin is dead. Well, apart from the law, it doesn't mean that sin wasn't there, right? Because Romans 5 tells us that it was there before this commandment was broken. He's saying that without the law, the power of sin and death wasn't as active or as influential as it could have been. Even if my mom doesn't forbid me to eat the cookies, right? I still know that I'm not supposed to eat cookies. I know that it's wrong for me to eat them when I'm not supposed to, right? So, apart from the law, the knowledge is still there that this is sin, but when the law comes, it's much more obvious. And the power of sin can be much more active and much more damaging. Ironically, the law that was meant for life allowed sin to flourish and be more active than it ever could have been without the law. Then we're going to go to point 2. All of my slides aren't that funny. I tried. The commandment that was meant for life resulted in death for me. So I've only got 2 points. Alright? And this is the second one. Now I'm going to read verses 9 through 12, so follow along with me. Once I was alive apart from the law. But when the commandment came, sin sprang to life, and I died. The commandment that was meant for life resulted in death for me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So then, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and just and good. The commandment that was meant for life resulted in death. Adam and Israel, they were alive apart from the law. At least Adam was, right? Israel they had already experienced the sin, and they already knew it. They weren't as rebellious as they were before the law came. After the law came to Israel, specifically at Sinai, you can read the Old Testament. It got much worse. It got much, much worse. Like, it didn't go well. They were given this law to understand, like, right out of Exodus, right? They come from this place that the Egyptians had worshipped in this way, and they needed to know how to obey, to serve, and to worship God. The law is good. It's been given for a good purpose. The only problem is that sin came in and wreaked havoc. The Israelites were unfaithful to God throughout their history. They were even called or compared to a prostitute in Hosea. Going and doing their own thing with other gods and other things and idols and whatnot. It got so bad that they were exiled from the land that they were promised. They had sinned against God Himself. That was the problem. And just a side note for, because I know I get on my high horse sometimes, is that I can identify very strongly with Israel most of the time. Very strongly sometimes. And it's weird because sometimes we're like, oh, well, we're living in the Spirit over here and doing this thing and you know, whatnot. But sometimes I think that we don't take the piece of the humble pie that's offered to us when we look at Israel and see how sinful they are, and instead of looking at what they did and being like, oh Lord, how sinful am I? Please give me your grace and your mercy, and please help me to live by the Spirit, because I know that I'm just as bad. Sometimes we don't take the humble pie that's offered to us. So the law that was meant for life was actually what resulted in death for me. Sin worked in me to destroy me, right? The moment that Adam sinned, the moment the disease, it's a disease, right? It's dangerous. It's here to kill. The disease of sin started contaminating everything that God had made. And sin worked through the law to bring death to all. Right? And so I think this is an important point. So I'm going to make it real quick. God is life. Okay? He's the source of life. And if sin is what separates us from God, then we are without our source of life. That's why death came. We're separated from our source of life. It's kind of like a thirsty man in the desert who's never had water. Right? Desperately needs water. He desperately needs his source of life. But he can't have it. He's in a desert. He's been separated from the water that would provide him with life. There's no life apart from him because he's the source of life. And this is in Colossians 1, 15 through 20, 1 John 1, 1 through 4, John 1, 3 and 4. Now I'm going to read that one. All things were created through him, and apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. Life was in him, and that life was the light of men. That's talking about Jesus, the Word. And then we go into 1 John 5:12. The one who has the Son has life. The one who doesn't have the Son of God does not have life. We're sinful people. Right? We know that. Talk about it. We know that we're sinful. Our entire being has been bent. Sorry, I said that word. Been bent so far out of shape. And we've been crushed to the point it's like trying to bend iron with your hand, like your arm, or steel or something really strong. I don't know. I can't bend iron. If you had a thing of steel and it got bent, and you're sitting there trying to bend it back with everything you got, but you can't budge it. Our nature, our self, has been so bent, so broken, that we can't bend it back. And there's only one that can. Jesus Christ is the only person that can bend back that. Otherwise, we've got no chance. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Right? He's the only one that can bend back the brokenness that is our soul. That is our entire being. So it's important that sin worked in me, in verse 11. That sin had seized an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it, killed me. So here came death. Came rolling in. Then God gave the law. And it was holy, and it was just, and it was good. So is the law sin? Absolutely not. It is holy and just and good. But the law can't save us. We can't even save ourselves. I can't be good enough or try hard enough to even get close to measuring up to the law. And even if I did, I've been so contaminated by sin that it feels like I can't even breathe. Right? I'm just a man in the desert who's so thirsty that for all intents and purposes he is dead. The only way we can have life and have it abundantly is through faith in Jesus Christ, because He is the living water. And the water that we drink will never run dry, but will spring up into us as a fount that gives eternal life. So what are some things to take away from today? Next slide. We've got some application. Right? The first one, I think the one that comes most immediately to mind is to stop trying to live by the law. Stop. The law isn't going to save you, and you should stop trying to be good enough. Or to read your Bible more so that maybe God will love you more, so you can get more blessings or something. We aren't following God's commands out of some sense of duty, or because we feel obligated to. I'm doing this just because I have to. We're following God's commands and His law out of love. So let me give you a kind of an illustration to prove my point. What would you rather have? Would you rather have your spouse or your significant other come up to you with flowers and give them to you and then tell you, I'm doing this because I felt like I had to? Or would you rather have your spouse and significant other come up to you with flowers, give them to you, and say, I'm doing this because I love you? We don't follow His commands out of some sense of duty, but out of love for Him who first loved us. Number 2, live by the Spirit's power. Right? We've got to stop living by the law and start living by the Spirit's power. Because if you've come to faith in Christ, you've been set free. Romans 8. You've been set free from the law of sin and death. And you can live righteously by the Spirit. Number 1, stop trying to live by the law and start living by the Spirit. Number 2. Number 3, I think this could be an application for every sermon. Read the Scriptures. The law is holy and just and good. And because of the Spirit who lives in you, you can be uplifted, encouraged, sanctified, big church word, cleansed, bent back into shape. By the gospel being proclaimed to you as a Christian, as you read and sit and dwell in the presence of Christ. So, I'm going to pray and we're going to be dismissed. Just think about the law in your own life. Think about, are you really living by the Spirit? Or are you living off of your own power? Because that's a law to itself sometimes. And finally, to know the law. Because it's not sinful. Right? Well, the law is not sin. Absolutely not. And we can read and understand, and by the Spirit's guidance, we can be changed by the law that was given to us by the power of the Spirit. So pray with me. And if at any point you have questions or concerns or anything like that, afterwards, maybe you want to talk more about the who's the I thing, then you're welcome to come talk to me. I would love to talk to you afterwards. But for now, we're going to pray and dismiss. So.
Brother Mike came up to me and asked me if the church remembered he and Lisa in prayer. They got a phone call about their grandkids, their family issue, and go into it. They would like to live in prayer before we go home tonight. So we can include that in the closing prayer.
Yeah, that'd be great. Pray for Mike and Lisa and their grandkids. Some family stuff.
It's a family issue.
Family stuff. Okay. Also, just before we leave, an uplifting and encouraging thing, I hope. My friend that came this morning, he sang praises to everyone that came and shook his hand and was so, he was so thankful. And he was very, very impressed by how many people started coming up to him and shook it. He said, I thought I met the whole church. It was so many people, and he was very, very impressed. And to me, that speaks a lot to me. And I'm very thankful because he's my friend and he's coming in. And it meant a lot to me as well that everyone had surrounded him and really just taken part and welcoming him in. So thank you for that. And let's pray and dismiss. Dear Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for all that you've done for us, Lord. And continuing to do. I pray that you'd be working through us, Lord, and we'd be living by your Spirit. It wouldn't be about things that we're doing, Lord, but the glory would be given to you because of what you're doing through us. And I pray, Lord, for Mike and Lisa and the family things that they had come up. Lord, I pray that you would just be ministering to them through us, through other people, that your love would just surround them. They would be comforted by your presence. And I pray these things, Lord, in your name. All right,